Hey everyone, today is day 5 of my 30-day SQL query challenge, and the problem that we have today is to generate a salary report. Now we have been given 3 input tables as you can see here. The first table is the salary table. It has information about the employees. So there's an employee ID, employee name and base salary. Okay. Then I have another table which is the income table, which has information about 3 different slabs on which the salary is given. So there is a basic slab, which is something like the base salary, which is 100% of the base salary is given to the employee. Then there is additionally, the employee also gets allowance, 4% addition to his salary, his or her salary. Then there is others, which is an additional allowance of 6%. When it comes to deduction, there is 3 different deduction that can happen on a salary: insurance, health and house, and how much percentage of this deduction happens is mentioned here. Okay. Now the salary that is given in the salary table is the base salary. Remember that. Okay. Now in this problem, we need to do 2 different things. The first thing is, as mentioned here in the problem statement, using the 3 tables, first write a query to populate the employee transaction table. Okay. So we need to populate this table. We need to write a query to populate this table. And in order to populate this table, we need to use these 3 tables. So we need to write a query which is going to dynamically or at the moment take the data from these tables and then populate here. Okay. So if the data in these 3 tables changes, then you need to repopulate this table, that is the employee transaction table, with the updated data. Okay. Now this is the first task, to populate the employee transaction table. So once you have done that, then the last step is basically to generate this report. Okay, that is shown at the bottom here. Now, as you already know, you will find the problem statement and the data set and everything else in my blog as well as in my Discord channel. So you will find the link in the video description. Download it, solve it, and then share your solution in the Discord. Okay, and help each other. I'm going to be first solving this problem in PostgreSQL database, and then I will also solve this in the SQL Server database, that is Microsoft SQL Server. The reason is because the solution is different. Okay, and you will come to know when I'm going to solve it. Okay, first of all, let me go into my PostgreSQL database. This is my PG admin tool. Now I have already mentioned the script here, and I'm going to recreate these tables. So I have created these 4 tables. So I have the salary table, I have the income table, I have the deduction table, and finally I have the empty employee transaction table. First thing, I need to populate this table, right? So let's start with our first task to populate this table. How do I populate? First of all, let me query this table. So I say select star from this table, and you can see that I have 4 different fields: employee ID, employee name, transaction type, and amount. Now, if I look back at what I need, this is basically I need to populate, right? So employee ID and employee name, I can easily get from the salary table. So straight away, let me do one thing, and I'm just going to mention it here. I'm just going to say select star from the salary. And if I just fetch the 2 fields that I need, okay, so I'll say employee ID, comma, employee name. If I run this, I'm getting the first 2 fields for my employee transaction table. What is the next thing that I need? The next thing that I need is the transaction type. Now, what is transaction type? If you look at here, it's basically all the income as well as all the deduction. Okay. And if you see carefully, for each employee, they have been tagged to each of these 6 type of income and deduction. Okay. So first of all, let me get all of these 6 income and deduction. So first of all, let me say select income, comma, percentage from the income table, and if I run this, I'm getting that. And same way I can copy it and I can do for deduction, right? And if I copy this, put it here, and you can see that I have the deduction, right? Now what I need is I need to consider the data from both this table. I need all the 3 types of income, all the 3 types of deduction together, and I need to join that with my employee table. Why? For every employee, I need to find what is his or her basic salary, allowance, others, insurance, health, and house, right? So every record from the salary table should join with every record of these 2 tables, right? So first of all, let me take these 2 data together, and then I will see how can I join this table with the result of these 2 tables. Okay. Now, in order to take the result of these 2 tables, the income and deduction table together, I can simply put a union here, right? If I put a union here and if I run this, you can see that I'm getting all the 6 type of transactions or 6 type of income and deductions together along with its percentage. Okay, because I need this percentage to find the actual amount for each employee. Now, the next task is I have all of my 6 type of transactions here. I have my employee name and employee ID here. how do I join them together, right? Because there is no common column based on which I can do the join. But based on my requirement, I want every record of employee to join with every other record of these two tables. That means I need to do a cross join, right? So what I can do here is I can just mention cross join. I'll open the parenthesis and I'll just move this to the right, and I'm just going to move it here and close the parenthesis. I'm going to give an alias like X, and let's say if I just fetch the fields from here. So let's say I will fetch, okay, so I'm just going to give an alias for both of these fields. So I'll say trns type. This is basically what is expected here, right? So I'm just going to give the same name for this next query here, okay? And then I'm just going to fetch this trns type. Okay, so if I just run this now you can see that I'm getting 18 records. Okay, there are 18 records fetched. Why? There were 3 employees from the salary table, and this subquery here is basically returning me 6 records. Since I'm doing a cross join, every employee here gets matched with all of these 6 income and deduction. That means 6 into 3, totally 18 records. Okay, that seems fine. For example, if you just want to see it in a better way, I could do order by, let's say, 2, okay, employee name. And if I just run this, you can see that for my employee LX, there are 6 records, and he has now been tagged to all the 6 type of transaction that are available in the deduction and in the income table. Okay, this is fine. And this is exactly what I wanted based on what I have in this employee transaction table. Okay, now the last thing that I need is I need to calculate this amount, right? I need to know for Rohan how much insurance basically is getting deducted. For LX, how much insurance getting deducted, and same way for every other employee and every other transaction types, right? Now, how I could do that is just by using simple math, right? I could say case when, let's say if the transaction type is equal to allowance, okay? If it is allowance, then what I want to do, what is allowance? Allowance is something like, it's 4%, right? So let's say for Rohan, his salary is 5,000. So his basic salary will be 100% of it. So 5,000 is his base salary. Allowance is 4% over 5,000. So how much is 4% of 5,000? I think it is around 200 probably, if I'm not wrong. And so basically his allowance should be 200, right? And same way I need to find for all the other transaction types here, right? So how I can calculate that is I could just tell if the transaction type is allowance, then I want how do I calculate the allowance? I could just tell base salary, okay, that is whatever salary I get from this table, salary table, into, I need to do this percentage, right? Percentage corresponding to each type. So here I can just tell percentage divided by 100, because what is percentage? You need to divide by 100 to get the actual percentage, right? So this, because this is just a number, right? So if I do this, and let me just put this inside the parenthesis, okay, and I think that's all. If I do this, probably I should get my allowance, and I'm going to name it like, what was that? It was amount. Okay, so if I just run this, you can see that I'm getting the allowance, but I'm getting allowance as 0. Okay, so something is wrong. What is wrong is this percentage is an integer. So when I created this table, I think percentage, you can see that it is an integer. Okay, and so I think the value here is 4. 4 divided by 100, ideally it should have written 0.04, right? But in PostgreSQL, whenever you divide an integer with an integer, the result is always an integer. So even though it is 0.04, it returns the integer that is a whole number of it, that is 0. Okay, so if I want it to display the actual decimal values, then what I need to do is I need to use a cast here. I can say cast this one as, let's say, decimal. Okay, and now if I run this, now you can see that it is returning me the actual value. Okay, there are too many decimal points. We'll try to fix that. But now whatever logic I wrote here was just to fetch for one particular allowance. And I need to do this for all the 6 different types of transaction type. And then that means I'll need to repeat this 6 times, right? Rather, I could just do this here in the subquery from where I'm getting it. So what I can do is I'll just copy this whole thing. Okay, that is this whole percentage. I'll put it here as percentage. Same thing, I'll put it here as percentage. Okay, and then I'll use that percentage here. Okay, so I don't need to repeat this cast multiple times in this case. Okay, so I just have to do it twice here. Okay, and now if I run, I'll still probably get the same output. you can see that it is still the same output. Okay, so but I'm getting too many decimal points. We'll try to fix that by using a round. Okay, so I'm just going to use the round function. I'll say just 2 decimal points, and if I now run this, now I think it looks better. So I'm getting 240 with 2 decimal point. That is fine, right? Now this is just for one particular transaction type. I need to do that for all the other 5, right? So I'll just put this here, and okay, and let's say I'll just move this to the right. Okay, so this is for elements. Then I have basic, then I have what else? I have others, I think. After that, I have house, then I have, I think, health, and then finally I also have insurance, right? So I think that's all. Everything else stays the same. Let me just run it and let's see if it actually works. And looks like it works. For LX, you can see that basic 6,000, insurance, house, health, allowance, everything is calculated. Okay, so looks fine. Okay, so probably this is the data I want. I don't need this order by. Okay, and I'm just going to just execute this and I'll get the data. But my intention is to load into this table, right? The employee transaction table is currently empty. So I'm just going to say insert into this table. And if I run this whole script, you can see that 18 records are inserted. Now, if I check my data in this employee transaction table, you can see that I have got the data that I need. Okay, so I think it is proper now. Okay, so this was the first task, to populate the employee transaction table with the data from these 3 tables. I hope this is clear, right? This was pretty simple, probably, right? Now let's move on to the main task of this problem, that is to generate this report. Okay, now when you look at this report, we have data in this table and we also have these 3 tables. What we want one record to be generated for every employee. It should tell its basic, allowance, others, and all the deductions mentioned here. Additionally, they should also calculate the gross salary, total deductions, and the net pay. Okay, so there are some calculations that we need to do, right? Now, how do I transform this row level data into column level data, right? I think everyone would have guessed we probably need to use pivot, right? So because you see that insurance, house, basic, health, everything is in row level. Now in the output, I need it in the column level, transform from row to column. Now the easiest way to do this is by using pivot, but we are using PostgreSQL database, and in PostgreSQL database, we do not have something called as pivot. But instead of pivot, we have something called as cross tab, which kind of does the same task. Okay, but the syntax, everything is different. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to provide you a solution first by using cross tab in PostgreSQL, and then I'll provide you the solution in Microsoft SQL Server using pivot. Okay, so you know both of it. Let's start with this cross tab. Okay, building the report. So building salary report. Okay, now if you are not familiar with cross tab, whenever in PostgreSQL you have to use cross tab. Cross tab is not available by default. You need to install extension, okay, which is called table func. Once you have installed it or once you have created it, only then cross tab becomes available. Now, how do you create that extension? You just need to say create extension table func, okay. And I think I have already created it. You can see that already exists because I already created it. If you have not created it in your database, then basically this command will create it. Okay, once you have done this, the next thing is to use the cross tab. Now first of all, I'm going to tell you the syntax of writing or using a cross tab. You just need to say select star from, then say cross tab. Okay, and then inside cross tab, it basically works like a function. You need to provide 2 arguments. Okay, so the first argument is basically your base query. Okay, and then you need to provide a second argument, which is your list of columns. Okay, and then finally, after you have provided the list of columns, you need to also provide like an final list of final column list. Okay, with final columns with its data type. Okay, so you need to mention the data type of your final columns here. Okay, so this is what the syntax of cross tab looks like. Okay, now what we need to do is, first of all, let us come up with the base query, then let's come up with the list of columns, and then we'll look at this final list of columns. Okay, now what do you mean by base query? Now, whenever you're writing a base query here, it's basically an SQL query which kind of gives all the data that cross tab needs to transform row level data into column level data. Now, the important thing is you need to follow certain rules. The rule is this base query needs to at least have 3 columns. It needs to return at least 3 columns. Okay, so I'm not going to explain this in detail because this is not a tutorial about crosstab. I have made a separate video about it. I'll probably leave in the video description, so if you want to check that. Okay, now the data that I want is all present in my employee transaction table. I don't even need to use this, right? Because everything is present here. So I'll just use employee transaction. I'm just going to say select from the employee transaction, I think, right? And I need 3 columns minimum, right? The first column, as I told you, this is the rule of base query. You need to follow this rule. The first column needs to be the unique identifier. Okay. Now from here in my final result, I can see the unique identifier is basically the employee name, right? So here I could just tell employee name. This is my first column, that is unique identifier. The second column needs to be the column that is going to return the new columns that your crosstab needs to create. Okay, so I know that I have this transaction type column. It has all these values, and for each of the value, I need to create one new column, right? So that means this is basically the column that returns me the final list of columns which needs to get transposed, or for which you need to create a new column, right? So that is why here I'm just going to say trns underscore type. This is going to be my second column. The last column is, once you have created all of these new columns, the values that needs to get inserted into this column should come from that column, and that is amount here, right? So that is why I'm going to mention amount. Now if I run this, these are the 3 fields that I want from this table. Okay, and in fact this is basically the base query. Okay, so that's it. This is the base query that I need. Only thing, it needs to have 3 columns minimum. Unique identifier, the first column. Second, the list of columns, it should be returned. And third is the value that gets into each of these new columns. Okay. Then I have this, the list of list of columns, right? Now I can easily get the list of columns by just doing a distinct of that column name, that is transaction type, from my employee transaction table. You can see that these are the 6 new columns that I want to create in my final output, right? And all of that I can get from the transaction type column in the employee transaction table, right? So I can either hard code each of the column values here, or I can just put a query to do that. Okay, so I think that's all here. Then comes the result. Now here I just need to mention all the columns, okay, that will be returned finally by the query. So first of all, I know my first column is going to be employee, okay, and employee is going to be varchar. How do I know that? You can see that this is basically what I want, and I know in my query I already have the employee name, right? So that will be tagged to this particular column, okay, and I know that its data type is varchar. Okay, that's fine. The next thing is, I know that this is my base query, right? From this, for each of the different transaction type, I need to create a new column. So each of these values here will become a new column. So I just need to mention that. So I'm just going to say, let's say allowance, and what is the data type of it? Data type you need to check here. You need to run the base query. You will get this value. Each of this column is going to store this amount value. This amount value is a numeric data type, right? So you need to follow the same data type. If you provide a different data type, you'll get error. Okay, so it has to be numeric. So allowance is one field, and let me maybe, yeah, I'll just keep it the same. Then I'll say basic, okay, and basic also is numeric. Next is, let's say, others. It is also numeric, right? And then next is, I think, what else? Insurance, right? It is also numeric. And after insurance, I think I have health, which is numeric again. And then I have house, which is numeric again. Okay, so I think that's all. Now if I run this query, that's it. Okay, I have just created a base query. I gave the list of columns, and then this is my final list of columns with data type. Okay, if I now run this whole query, you can see that I'm getting some data, but this data that I'm getting is not right. Okay, why? Because ideally what I wanted was, when I used crosstab, I wanted those 18 records from the employee transaction table to be aggregated, and it returns 3 columns, 3 records. But here you can see that it is still returning me all the 18 records. Now the reason why this is not working is because I missed a very important clause in this base query, and that is order by. Okay, now I'm not going to explain how this order by exactly works. Okay, in this particular case, I have explained this in detail in one of my older videos. I made a video about this Olympic data set. There I was using, for one of the queries I was using crosstab, and there I have explained in detail how order by actually is responsible for this aggregation of the values. Okay, so it will take me some time if I have to explain it now. So I'll leave a link to that video. Probably you can watch that video, okay, to better understand that concept. Now, if I just do here, let's say I want to order by these two columns. So employee name and the transaction type. Okay, and if I just added this order by. Okay, and now if I just run this query, now you can see that suddenly the aggregation is now happening. Okay, so whenever you're using a base query in your cross tab in PostgreSQL, you need to order the base query. Okay, if you don't order it properly, then the aggregation is not going to happen properly. Okay, it's because of the functionality of cross tab. Okay, there is one reason for that. Now, I have got this aggregated value, but if you look carefully, it is not correct, because you see here, it's telling me the base salary as 300, 350, 250 and others as 6,000, 7,000, 5,000. That is wrong, right? My base salary was 5, 6 and 7,000, whereas others was much lesser, if you see here, right? So looks like I'm getting the values, but they are not in the proper columns. I need to fix that. Now, in order to fix that, basically what is happening is, there is a particular order in which your transaction types and amounts are getting returned from this base query, whereas the order in which these columns are returned here is different. You can see here others is first, then insurance, then basic, etc. Right? Same way, this order of columns here also is different. So what we should do is, we should align the sorting of columns here as well as here. Okay, so that it will match with the column order that will be followed by the base query, and so that all the values will be in sync. Okay, so in order to fix this second argument here, I could just use an order by here. So I could just tell order by, I don't need the employee name, okay, but I'll say order by transaction type. If I do this, now you can see that it will follow the proper order, that is allowance, basic, health and everything. Okay, and I'll try to follow that same order here. Okay, so I'll say allowance is first, then comes basic, then comes health, then comes house, and after that is insurance, and finally it is others. Okay, and now if I run this query, now you can see that I think it is fine. Okay, so for example, let's just compare. Alex allowance is 240. Alex, let's say allowance is, where is allowance? It's 240. His base is 6,000. I know that. Health is 360. Health is, where is health? Health is 360, and then house is 240. House is 240, and then insurance is 300. So insurance, where is insurance for Alex? It's 300, and finally others is 360, right? So others is 360, right? So this value that you're getting here is basically now correct. Okay, now we have basically solved most of the problem. The only thing remaining is, if you look at our expected output, along with these 6 columns, we also need to find the gross, we need to find total deduction, and we need to find the net pay, right? Now, how do we do that? What I can do here is, in my final, when I'm fetching the queries, I can just mention that. So I can say employee, okay? Then I can just tell after employee, what do I have? I have, let's say, or I can just move it here, employee, then basic, and basic allowance and others, allowance and others, right? And then I think I need the gross. Now, what is the gross salary? Gross salary is basically the sum of basic, allowance and others, right? So I can just put it here, I can put it here, and put a plus symbol here to sum these 3 amounts, and I'm going to name it like gross. Okay, and similarly, what about the other fields? So insurance, health and house. So I'll just mention it here, insurance, health and house, and then I need the total deduction, right? So I need this total deduction. Now total deduction is basically the sum of these 3, right? Because these are all the deduction categories or attributes, right? So here I'll just put it inside, and then I'm just going to sum all of them together. Okay, and this one I'm just going to name it like as total deductions. Okay, and then finally what I need is the net pay. Net pay is basically gross minus total deduction. If you do gross minus total deduction is your net pay. So what I can just do is, I'll take this whole 3 values here, I'll subtract it with the total deductions value, right? And hopefully this is going to return me as net pay. Okay, And I think that is all for this query. If I now run this, now you can see that I'm getting 3 records. This is the basic, allowance, my gross is the sum of these 3, total deductions is kind of sum of these 3 fields, and net pay is basically this one minus this one, right? So this is basically the solution to my problem using crosstab in PostgreSQL database. Okay, I hope you understood this. Now I'm also going to show you how you could do the same thing using pivot in Microsoft SQL Server, because if you're using Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server, then you will need to use pivot. Okay, crosstab is only supported in PostgreSQL. So I'm just going to go into my Microsoft SQL Server. I'm using this Azure Data Studio tool. Okay, and I have already created the same 3 tables. So I'm just going to run it. Okay, so the same 3 tables are created, but I think the employee transaction table is empty. But we already found a script for that, right? We already wrote the script to populate the employee transaction, and I'm going to use the same script in SQL Server as well. So I'll just come back here and I'll just put it here. And let me just run this. Let's see if it works. Okay, and it worked. 18 rows inserted. And if I just query from the employee transactions, you can see that I'm getting the data exactly how I got it in PostgreSQL. Okay, now the last task that I need to do is basically use pivot to transform this data into my expected output like this, right? Now I'm going to show you how easy it is to use pivot. Okay, so first and foremost, let me just tell you what is the syntax of using pivot. Okay, so the syntax is, whenever you're using pivot table, you just say select star from and then you need to provide a base query, right? So I think, yeah, so you say this one, this is where you need to write your base query. Okay, you need to give an alias here. Let's say I'm going to call it like BQ. Okay, then you say the pivot keyword, and then inside pivot you provide the pivot part of the query. Okay, here you need to provide 2 things. One is the aggregate function and with the column, and then the list of columns here. Okay, and then you provide an alias for this subquery as well. I'll say PQ, and I think that's all. So the only thing that we need to come up here is the base query and then these 2 things. Okay, now when it comes to base query, I can just go into my PostgreSQL and the base query that I already wrote here, right? The same thing I can copy. I will not include the order by, it's not required for pivot. Okay, so I'll just use the same base query as I used in PostgreSQL. Okay, and that is what I'll just put here. Okay, again, this also has the same rule. First column needs to be unique identifier, second needs to provide the list of columns, third needs to provide the value for each of the new columns. Okay, once I have done that, what about my aggregation? Aggregation, what I basically want to do is I want to sum all the amounts together for each of this transaction type for each of the employees, right? So what I can do here is I'll say sum of the amount, right? So that is what I want to do. And when it comes to list of columns, you know that all my list of columns is present in this particular column. So here I can just tell for this particular column, in here you need to provide all the different values that will be present in this column and for which you need to create the new columns, right? And those values are, I think first it is allowance, right? And the second one is basic, if I'm not wrong. Third one is others. And fourth one is, what is the fourth one? Insurance, health, and house, right? So I'll say insurance, health, and let's say house. Okay, so these are the 6 values. You need to provide it inside the square brackets, right? If you're using Oracle, then instead of, sorry, I think I by mistake executed it. What I want to do here is I want to put the allowance, yeah. Okay, so I'll just put it here. Okay, so I think I'll just copy that allowance name. Something is wrong. I'll just put it here. Okay. Yeah, so I put all the 6 values here. If you're using Oracle, then you follow the same syntax, but instead of this square brackets, just use the double quotes. Okay. I think that's all probably should work. If I run this, okay, you can see that I'm getting all the values that I need. Okay. The only thing that I'm missing is the gross salary, the total deduction, and the net pay. Now, in order to get that, I can again reuse the query that I already wrote for PostgreSQL. I'll just copy this whole select clause and I'll go into my SQL server. I'll put it here And if I run that query now, and I'm getting an error because I think okay, the employee name is this one, not employee. So here I'll just tell employee name as employee. Okay, and now if I run this, now you can see that I'm getting my final output. Okay, so this is basically the solution in Pivot. I hope you understood this. I hope you like this query. If you did, mention your feedback in the comments below. I would like to read it. And if you have any new solutions or any different solutions, share them in Discord. And I'll see you again tomorrow with a new problem. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.